It's about that time for another like quick little limit test. In this video, I want to compare all of the tanks and all of their sub-specs to each other, and what I mean by that is their hero talents. It is something that I kind of failed to do in the last video that I did on this. I kind of either preferred the more overpowered spec or the spec that I preferred playing. But in this case, I'm going to try to compare all the hero talents. And this is not meant to show which tank is like best, but it's trying to draw some kind of middle ground or lines to try to figure out exactly where Blizzard is trying to think of tuning going forward. There's a couple of metrics that I'm going to be looking at in this video. I want to see not only their overall damage in the course of over the course of a pull. Of course, if they're able to successfully do it, we're going to look at HPS. Of course, this value doesn't matter as much because some tanks take more damage but heal for more versus something that maybe just straight up mitigates more damage. And then I also want to look at priority damage as well, because I think this is a pretty interesting metric to look at. So the idea for this test is that I'm going to be taking each of the hero talent specializations into an Algeth'ar Academy 15. We're going to be pulling just one pack. If you weren't aware of the changes that happened this week, the Algeth'ar Academy Vile Lashers actually have been added. There has been a tank buster added into their profile. So now they're going to apply a pretty nasty bleed with an upfront physical hit that some tanks can handle well, some tanks can't. And when you try to pull all three together, there's actually a point where the bleeds keep getting applied and stacking, which can result in pretty quick death. Of course, if you're playing with like a full group and a healer and you have DRs and a lot of cooldowns to kind of dispatch these mobs quickly, it makes sense to mass pull. But in this case, I wanted to have like a more realistic scenario of a couple of mobs hitting the tank and having a tank buster mob in the pull. Like I said, we're going to be looking at DPS, HPS, and then the Vile Lasher, like the big mob. We're going to look at what their percentage is after I consider it a successful pull. What does a successful pull look like? If we're able to kill all of these small lashers, I'm considering it a successful pull, because most tanks, once there's just like a one mob left, more often than not, a tank is going to be fine there. So I wanted to use this metric as a way to figure out which tanks are bringing a ton of priority damage, or which tanks are mostly just AoE, or which tanks might need a buff in their single target, because there are some that definitely do. Anyways, with that all out of the way, let's kind of get into the testing. So starting off, we're going to start with Shado-pan. Now, Shado-pan has been my personal favorite tank for obvious reasons. First off, it is a very explosive tank when it comes to damage. It's also my main on live servers, so I really enjoy kind of the cadence of its current rotation. But overall, it performs just fine. Now, Brewmaster was a tank that I think I struggled with the most in this kind of testing environment because it requires a little bit more accurate play from like making sure you're purifying and casting Expel Harm at the correct time. When you don't have a healer, Brewmaster does have a lot of HPS currently, but there are some things that are tuned a little low right now. Celestial Burr, for example, is significantly undertuned. Celestial Infusion in this current build is not working. It's not providing an absorb at all. But with the addition of things like Vital Flame into the build or into the talent tree, it has given Brewmaster a lot more self-sustain over the course of a pull by just dealing damage, which I think feels really good. I've talked about this in previous videos, but Brewmaster tank right now feels phenomenal to play, period. Even though there are a lot of bugs. Anyways, I don't want to rant too much about those types of things and how they're necessarily feeling. Outside of the fact that I just like plays really well. It ended up doing this pull in 3 minutes and 20 seconds when all of these small lashers died, where I was quickly then eliminated afterwards. The Vile Lasher's HP percentage was at 26%. So we're seeing this is like a good benchmark to use because some tanks are going to be well below this, some tanks are going to be well above this. And so being able to have priority damage through your blackout combos, your Tiger Palms, your blackout kicks, and specifically your Keg Smash doing more damage to a priority target, Brewmaster actually is a pretty good middle ground for this. Now their HPS is a little misleading. I ended up finishing the pull at 156k healing per second. This is significant and in my opinion slightly misleading because I think about 80k of it or 85k of it was actually dedicated to stagger, just purifying stagger. And that is an interesting metric to look at, and I don't mind having it on the HPS meters, but it is a little misleading because it's like counting warriors blocked damage as healing in a kind of a similar way. It's like there's the damage we're mitigating passively. If they're going to keep it in the tree, I would maybe like to see it maybe at the bottom of the meter or somehow included in a different segment of details than it is currently, because it's really hard to get a grasp on like how much Vital Flame is healing for, or how much Celestial Fortune is healing for. And so that's my only kind of complaint with this. But for the most part, 117k DPS is, I would say, on the higher end compared to most other tanks, and having decent priority damage as well is really good. Now, flipping it a little bit over to Master of Harmony, this is where things get a little unique, because it took me about an extra 20 seconds to get this pull down. We went from a 320 to pull time or kill time on Shado-pan to almost a 343. Now, what's unique about this is that our damage ended up actually being a little bit higher in this situation. We actually finished the pull at 120k, and our HPS was almost near 200k overall. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. First off, Shado-pan naturally takes less damage due to things like predictive training, versus Master of Harmony, which ends up taking more damage but purifies more. So because we're purifying more damage per second and that stagger is counting, that's obviously going to have a massive impact in this massive like 40k fluctuation. Now, why I say it's interesting is because we did more damage, but the kill time took longer. What this has been indicating to me, especially with the Vile Lasher HP at the end of the pull being 18% down from 26 compared to Shado-pan, is that this is tending to do more priority damage to the main target, to the main mob. Now, Master of Harmony, I've said it in previous videos, I don't like how it's currently playing because of its overabundance of stacks that it's gaining from its like new hero talents, which is the Harmonic Surge. Besides that, it feels pretty decent to play, and honestly, you can even play without the Black Ox, which could result in more or less AoE damage depending on which talent you might allocate elsewhere. But for the most part, the damage is comparable, and it plays just fine. It's just you are actually losing damage in this case, and until Blizzard fixes that, this hero talent's going to feel really awkward. Overall, though, Brewmaster, stable spot, was able to do it on both of the hero talent trees. So overall, I'm a big fan of Brew. And what I like about this is Brew's in a nice middle ground right now. It's not doing the highest amount of damage. It's also not doing the lowest amount. So moving on, let's talk about Demon Hunter, because Demon Hunter, I think, is the currently dominant tank on beta testing right now. Once a pull is set up, Aldrachi, Reaver, and Annihilator are both impossible to kill. They feel incredibly tanky. Both of these attempts were done, I think, on my first try. So I was able to get like in and out. There wasn't like a lot of testing I had to do here. Now, starting off with Aldrachi, similar to how they operate on live, they have a ton of funnel damage on whichever target has their Reaver's mark. And so Aldrachi Reaver was able to get this pull down in 3 minutes and 5 seconds with a overall DPS of 152k, almost 30k, 20% above or 15% above of what Master of Harmony and Shado-pan were able to do on the Monk. Their HPS was a lot lower, 86k, but it's also not counting mitigated damage, parry damage, anything like that. So the HPS is going to look a little bit different. Now, I was playing Soulmonger, which I don't know is necessarily the most popular talent in the world to play. It is a nice fat absorb on top of everything. But overall, very, very stable tank once you get the pull started. And one thing to note is that while playing Aldrachi Reaver, we had the Vile Lasher HP at 0%. They died essentially at the same time. If anything, it died a second before some of the smaller guys did. And that's really where that big damage is coming from. Not only are they doing remarkable AoE, with their Reaver slashes or their Fury of the Aldrachi, but on top of that, they're also just funneling so much of that damage back into their primary target. And so right now, to me, Aldrachi Reaver clearly is like the winner out of all these tanks that I'm going to be talking about today, but it is not the highest, or I shouldn't say highest, but it isn't the only standout priority focused tank in the bunch. Now, oddly enough, Annihilator, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. For me personally, maybe I got unlucky, maybe it's just the way that the profile's laid out, maybe it's the fact that I wasn't playing some specific talents that would give me more priority damage, like Focused Cleave, for example. But the Annihilator took about the same amount of time to get the pull down with all the small adds, right? So it took about 3 minutes and 11 seconds, 6 seconds longer than Aldrachi Reaver, but 9 seconds faster than Shado-pan. Similar HPS, the damage output very similar to Shado-pan, around the 119k mark, except our Vile Lasher's HP was not 0% like the Aldrachi Reaver was, or not even around the 20 or 25% like the Brewmaster specs were. It was still at 62% health, meaning that this tank, or at least the build I was playing, granted it wasn't probably the best build to play, has nearly zero kind of like prio damage. And so this ended up being a pretty weak tank in that regard, but overall, solid AoE damage, solid HPS. The only thing that I don't like about Annihilator is that they've stripped out some of the, I guess, nuance, the complexity that the Annihilator tree originally had. It's a very, like, hit Fracture and hit Soul Cleave and hit Spirit Bomb all on cooldown whenever you can. And so the class doesn't have any of that like little depth like Aldrachi Reaver has, which is kind of centered around, you know, spending souls and throwing your glaives at the correct targets, or not even the correct target, but making sure that you do your rotation in the correct order. So Annihilator, I think, is going to be one of the easier tanks, at least in the VD, specifically for VDH to play. You're going to go in, you're just going to hit buttons and get free damage. Moving on to Death Knight. So Death Knight was 2 weeks ago was like the most oppressive tank. It was like doing 2 times every other tank's damage. It was infinitely tanky, and that was due to obviously a lot of different bugs and reverse tuning. Maybe like they went to tune things down and accidentally flipped them up instead. So they probably fired that intern at Blizzard. But basically the tank is now in a much more acceptable spot. Now originally when I tested Sand Lane, my damage was crazy low. It only said like 80k DPS or 88k or something like that. But I went back and I looked at when I was looking at over the footage, I noticed that there was like another name on my details, and like felt like I was in combat for a long period of time before actually getting in combat. So I ended up running it back because the pull took me like almost, it took me like 330, which felt normal, but because my damage was so low, it didn't make sense compared to the other tanks. Anyways, I went back and retested it. This was actually one of my fastest kills, one of my fastest pulls at 308, a little bit, only 3 seconds behind Aldrachi Reaver, except our Violaster HP was all the way up at 52%. This is a clear indicator that I think BDKs do a little bit too much AoE damage, similar to Annihilator, and not enough priority damage to their main target. Even with targeting the Lasher the entire time, Heart Strikes, Vampiric Strikes, Death Strikes all going into this target, most of the Lashers died really quickly, and this is thanks to things like Blood Boil, your obviously Blood Plague, as well as things like Desecrate, doing a ton of AoE damage, but not really a lot to priority mobs, which again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of tanks who have priority, and there's tanks that don't, but it's interesting to compare them all. Now, Deathbringer, on the other hand, was probably the first tank that was a step down. The first 5 hero specs or hero talents that I have been investigating or testing so far have been doing around the 120k mark, give or take, and the priority damage has kind of been all over the place. And so with Deathbringer, this is the first time where the pull goes from taking anywhere between like 3 to 330 to taking almost 4 minutes to complete. So this pull took me 352. I ended at 103k overall damage, very similar HPS than we saw to Sand Lane. I can't imagine this number changing much, even with like the permafrost shenanigans that Deathbringer has. They don't really gain or lose much HPS from this. Or the hero talents are, I should say, balanced in such a way where the HPS is standard, and this is expected to see. So the Violaster HP ended at 37%, which is surprising because you would think that Deathbringer actually is the hero talent that brings a lot more funnel damage than something like Brewmaster does, either in Shado-pan or Master of Harmony, but even both of those had a much lower Violaster HP percentage. And so this, to me, is really kind of showing a glaring issue of priority target imbalance. So there might be some type of buff to Reaper's Mark, there could be a buff to Heart Strike specifically, or Death Strike specifically. These damaging abilities probably need some type of buff. It would be interesting to look at this in a primarily single target encounter, which I haven't done yet, but seeing that even the quote-unquote funnel damage with the Reaper's Mark has like a much lower damage amount being sent into a priority mob just makes it clear that there is some type of single target ability issue in this kit, at least to me. Who knows? I'm kind of dumb though. So moving on to Protection Warrior. Surprisingly, this tank wasn't terrible, and kind of the opposite actually. Both Mountain Thane and Colossus were able to successfully do this despite not having a healer. While our HPS was actually the lowest of the bunch, actually let's just focus on Mountain Thane for now, I ended the pull at 54k, and I ended the pull at 105k damage done, so DPS. Now surprisingly, the Violaster was actually all the way down at 21%, which puts it pretty much right in between both of the Brewmaster specs, much lower than DK and Annihilator, but obviously a lot higher than Aldrachi Reaver, who was able to actually completely finish off the Violaster. Now, these kill times did take quite a while. They were actually the first 2 that were over 4 minutes. Mountain Thane took me 4:14 to finish, but the priority damage made kind of sense. It has significantly lower overall damage. I would imagine that like a Thunderclap buff might be needed again. I know they recently just buffed Thunderclap, but Thunderclap, Thunderblast might need a little bit of a bump there, or maybe it's a Phalanx thing, maybe it's a hero talent, or sorry, Apex talent thing that they need to buff. But I would imagine that they might try to bring Warrior and these other specs up towards where the other tanks are versus bringing every other tank down. I think that would be worst case scenario. Now, moving on to Colossus, we saw a 4-second difference, which is actually kind of surprising. Only a 4-second difference between Mountain Thane and Colossus. Very, very similar damage sitting at 105k. The HPS was slightly higher. Now, this could be any kind of variable. It could just be ignore pain. But also, Colossus tends to have a little bit more self-sustain through their ability to apply deep wounds, which benefits from, I'm blanking on the name of the ability. Fueled by violence. There we go. That works. So you're naturally going to have a slightly higher HPS. Colossus, to me, though, felt so much more tanky than the Mountain Thane counterpart. Mountain Thane just doesn't have that kind of like leech factor. And the biggest surprise of all was Colossus had their Vialasher all the way down at 9%. This is the second highest priority tank. At least, again, it could have been lucky crits. It could have just been like, yeah, I mean, it could have just been lucky crits on Shield Slam and my Demolish hits. But overall, Colossus had like this really impactful single target or priority damage ability with their Demolish. Overall, though, I would say every tank up to this point, I kind of forgot to mention it, every tank has felt good to play. Even Deathbringer, which is something that I wasn't a big fan of. Deathbringer has a slightly better flow now because of how they nerfed Sand Lane, unfortunately. But for the most part, I think both Warrior specs are playing really, really well. I just would like a little bit more haste, which may or may not happen by the end of the season. So we'll have to see. Okay, so let's move on to Druid. So we'll start with Druid of the Claw. Very, very powerful tank in its current state. Except it was a little on the slower end when it came to getting the pull down. So it was a little bit faster than Warrior, but with significantly lower priority damage. So I only ended up doing 102k by the end of the pull, or what I consider the end of the pull. The HPS was nearly 69k. Nice. Very tanky. Frenzied Regen was packing a punch. The regrowth, I don't know if this is a bug. It feels kind of buggy, but your free regrowth that you proc from Frenzied Regen with the I forgot the name of the talent, but with that one talent benefits from Dream of Cenarius. So you can be at like 10% health, hit Frenzied Regen with Dream of Cenarius, and it's like a lay on hands. It's actually crazy. Anyways, though, feels really good to play. I really like the direction Druid of the Claw is going in. The Vialasher's HP ended at 31% as well, so a little less prio damage than some of the tanks like Warrior or Brewmaster or Aldrachi Reaver specifically, but it has more priority damage than something like Sand Lane or even Deathbringer in its current state, which is a big red flag. Not necessarily for the Guardian Druid, but if Deathbringer with Reaper's Mark is having lower prio damage than Druid of the Claw with just hitting Mangle and Ravage, there's a problem. And then finally, last but not least, we have Elune's Chosen. This tank, I'm going to try to not be biased here because I don't like playing it. I think in its current state, it feels fine to play. You're kind of replacing your swipe filler with your Galactic Guardian procs. Again, I could have also been not playing the right build, even though it seems pretty cookie cutter that you're just going to pick most of your arcane talents. The issue that I have with this, I think this is going to be an okay. Let me gather myself again. So let's talk about the poll, and then maybe I'll talk about why I have kind of issues with this, or maybe why it needs a pretty major tuning pass. So it took me over 5 minutes to get this same poll down. It's clearly a tuning issue, right? I ended the poll at 76k DPS. Now I did actually heal 10k more as Elune's Chosen than I did as Druid of the Claw, which is something worth noting. You're just getting a lot more from your kind of passive arcane leech that you're going to be having throughout the pull. The priority damage also felt significantly lower, getting the Vialasher's HP only down to 40%, which means that it's the third worst prio damage tank out of the bunch so far. I feel like every ability is a filler, and that's kind of the major problem. Like whether it's Thrash, whether you're playing Raze or not, or hitting Maul, that doesn't feel that impactful. Lunar Beam just kind of does AoE damage. Your Galactic Guardian procs are going on sometimes random targets, obviously also the target you might be targeting, but it just doesn't feel like you have anything impactful in your kit that feels like a massive oomph. Also, any priority damage that they might have through like the Thrash Star Surge you're getting now is just like, I think it's hitting random targets, so that doesn't even really matter in terms of prio damage. Mangle hits like a wet noodle. I don't know. It's clearly a tuning thing. I don't know what they can tune about this off the top of my head, because if you start thinking like, okay, well maybe they need more Mangle damage or Thrash damage, any of that kind of stuff is going to also affect Jura the Claw, making that tank that much stronger. So they need to target specifically other abilities in the kit, like that, I guess that Elune's Chosen will play and Jura the Claw will have a hard time playing. So for example, like Moonless Night, obviously things like Lunar Beam or Galactic Guardian might need to get bumped up. But for the most part, this tank is doing clearly the least amount of damage and is probably in the most need of help. I just don't know what they could buff to make it better outside of very specific Elune Chosen abilities. Overall, though, plays fine. I wish there was like a thematic skin to playing Galactic Guardian as well, or like specifically Elune's Chosen. I wish when you were playing, like, so your Thrash becomes arcane damage, which is cool, that's fine. But it also still looks like Thrash. Like if it had like a purple glow instead of like that red glow when you do hit the button, I think it would maybe just make it a little bit more interesting to me. But this tank clearly is not performing all that well. Again, also might be playing a bad build, but I did play around a lot with the Elune's Chosen trying to get more damage while also being able to live. And this is the best I can come up with. Last but not least, let's talk about Paladin briefly. So both Lightsmith and Templar were incomplete tests. I could not for the life of me figure out a way to live more than 45 seconds to a minute without having a healer or some type of divine intervention, or without the game just alt F4ing. Now, I do want to mention that I don't think Paladin is in an unplayable state in group content. I think if you had a healer and a healer who knows how to heal prop Paladin in dungeons, it's probably a fine tank. It feels like old Brewmaster, like it's the only tank that can't live forever. Like your HPS and your ability to mitigate damage always falls short of whatever mobs you're tanking, which is funny because that's how Brewmaster used to be up until this point, where now it's actually able to do the pull, and prop Paladins, at least me playing it, can't. I also want to I do want to mention that I'm prop Paladin's probably one of my more comfortable tanks, so it wasn't a comfort thing for me. It was just this class needs a lot of help. I've talked about this before, but I think Protection Paladin is the most reworked tank coming into the War Within. They made the most significant change to their overall kit. While, Shado-pan or Brewmaster specifically, or in a more broader sense, was pruned and had a lot of abilities taken out, those weren't as impactful as Protection's abilities were. So removing a lot of the cooldown reduction, removing defensive abilities, it had such a major impact on this class in solo content like this, that it clearly still needs a lot of work. I saw a video the other day of, I think Yoda posted a Pit of Sauron 15, so like it's clearly able to do 15 keys with a group. It's just, it can't live by itself in this kind of content. And maybe I'm wrong. I would love, if you're a Paladin main and you want to go give this a shot, jump onto beta, go into a 15 Algeth'ar Academy, pull this pack here, and see how long you can live. Because for me, it felt like I was always falling behind. I don't know if the scaling on Word of Glory is working, because honestly, when I was hitting Word of Glory on myself, even when I was at like 10% health, it would bring me up to 15%, and I wasn't able to accumulate enough Holy Power or get a Shining Light proc to actually use Word of Glory again to get back to a healthy state. During the duration of Bubble, I couldn't even top myself. Even like it's in a really rough state. But I will say that the gameplay loop, the playstyle of it, does feel pretty good. Avenger Shield with the Apex talent giving Holy Power again, amazing. There's like Grand Crusade procs are now kind of working again. Not necessarily requiring you to stay in consecration also feels good, but there's clearly a defensive gap between this tank and every other tank that we've looked at so far in this video. So I'm hoping Blizzard addresses specifically maybe tuning on like Holy Bulwark. They could look at Word of Glory specifically, Sacrosanct Crusade, like specific hero talent nodes that end up providing a lot of healing to the Paladin would be great, because both Holy Bulwark and Sacrosanct Crusade end up doing a fair bit of your overall like mitigation or HPS, but compared to where the other tanks are at, it's clearly extremely lackluster. Either that, an HPS increase, or they need to probably some type of like base armor or block increase would also probably help them as well. Since Protection Warrior is doing just fine, being able to block and ignore pain most of their abilities, but yeah, unfortunately Paladin is just not in a good state. If you're a Paladin main and you're hoping Paladin gets better, we're not there yet. It's still a long way away. There's of course, again, there's nuance. I try different builds, but maybe I wasn't playing the right one. It's fine in group content. Solo content's kind of a joke because no one's actually ever soloing dungeons. And finally, it's early beta. So there's a lot of time for Blizzard to make additional changes, tuning, and anything can fluctuate at any given time. So all in all, I think I do have this Excel sheet pulled up, which has all of kind of the breakdown numbers. If we actually sort this by Lasher 8, let's just sort this by Lasher HP actually. So if we purely look at priority damage, Aldrachi Reaver is leading the charge. Colossus is shortly behind that, and then another jump up is Master of Harmony. After that, you know, Warrior and Shado-pan are looking pretty good, and then after that, we're seeing like DKs and Bears, followed by Annihilator. Again, like I've said before, what a lot of this means to me, I feel like 30% is okay, but anything past this might mean that these classes / hero talents need some type of single target buff to certain abilities. It's just really tough when you have Annihilator being this bad and Aldrachi being this good. So what do you change about it? You'd have to specifically target the hero talent tree. And so yeah, that's kind of interesting. Now, when it comes to specifically damage, we can kind of go our lowest damage dealer. I don't know why I put Elune's Chosen down one. Anyways, doesn't matter. Elune's Chosen is the worst. Clearly. And then Aldrachi Reaver is currently the best. I would like to imagine that they're going to try to aim, if we are going to try to predict any future tuning, I would imagine this is where their benchmark is. This is probably where they want tanks to be. Aldrachi's probably on the higher end of the, spectrum. And I think they need to buff some of these lower performing specs or classes. Obviously, Paladin is on a totally different fucking timeline right now. It's back when they were like at the start of the war, but then we're like, they don't want tanks to be strong at all. Paladin needs some attention. That's for sure. Anyways, let me know what you thought about this video. If you want me to look at stuff like this in the future or any other kind of tests you want me to do, let me know and give me some ideas because I'd be more than happy to try it. I had a lot of fun doing this. It was fun trying to figure out what build works, what builds don't, and kind of getting to see all of the hero talents kind of side by side. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.